Okay, so good evening, everyone. Thank you again for joining us. I am Elizabeth Renfro, and I am the Family Consumer Science Extension Agent for the University of Tennessee Extension here in Washington County. I have with me Adam Watson. He is one of our agricultural agents also within our office. And this evening, we are going to be discussing pizza gardening. And just so you all know, as I just said before, we are recording this Zoom session, and we will be putting it up on YouTube for you to refer back to if you so choose. Please be sure your phone or your microphones are turned on mute. You can also turn off your video if you like, or you can leave it on. That's fine also. If you have any questions, there is a chat box function that you should be able to ask your questions within that, and then we will answer it at the end of the presentation. And then, so of course, anything, just kind of a disclaimer, the information within this class is for educational purposes only. So reference to commercial products or trade names does not imply endorsement by UT Extension or bias against those not mentioned. So I am going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to hand it over to Adam. He's going to kick us off this evening.
All right, thank you, Elizabeth. And okay. So are you seeing the presenter or the presentation?
I see the presentation.
Excellent. It worked. Sometimes it doesn't. Well, thank you all, and we'll dive right into this. And I do have my phone number up there on the screen, and that is my cell phone number, and you all are more than welcome to reach out to me on that or send me an email if you have questions in relationship to this presentation or anything else that might come up with your gardens. So, of course, I think if you just stumbled across this topic, probably the first question we need to address is exactly what is a pizza garden? So pizza gardens are actually an educational tool, and they are targeted towards youth. And what it does, it kind of takes a common food item that a lot of kids like and puts it in relationship to gardening. And so part of the research behind this shows that whenever you have children engaged with gardening, they are more likely to try vegetables or other things that they haven't eaten before. And so it's a way to introduce children to healthier eating and to broaden perhaps their palates. So it's really kind of focused towards youth. So why are we doing this webinar? Well, one of the things that I have found on some of the both in-person as well as webinars I'm doing, a lot of people are interested in growing things, especially vegetables, but they're also very interested in how to use those. So tonight is our attempt to kind of give both sides of that, to where I'll talk some about growing some of the common ingredients that make up pizzas, and then Elizabeth will actually talk about putting those to use in the kitchen. So that's why we've kind of put together this topic this evening. So pizza gardens are very often aesthetically pleasing, and so they are, again, sort of geared towards youth, trying to engage them, so a little bit of whimsical to them. It's nice. Here's a couple of examples, one out of Michigan, one out of Georgia, and of course it looks like a pizza with a slice taken out. And while these are certainly pleasing to the eye, they may be a little bit challenging when it comes to rotating crops. So I probably wouldn't recommend or suggest that you must create a pizza garden in this shape. Another thing that's interesting, sometimes some organizations, in this case a school in Australia, but I also know of a community garden in Lexington, Kentucky, who actually had put in pizza ovens as part of their installation. So it was, again, a way to connect those kids to their food and give them that experience of cooking. And so just to reiterate, you know, visually stunning is wonderful, but we have to be honest and say sometimes some very non-aesthetically pleasing gardens are absolutely great when it comes to production. And the other thing to remind ourselves is pizzas don't always come in circles. So I think we can make any shape work and still call it a pizza. If you can have a Batman signal pizza, I think you can have a pizza garden that's shaped in a square. So what are some of the common ingredients or components of a pizza that we can grow in the garden? You'll see a list there on your screen that we're going to be touching this evening. It ranges from some herbs that we would use for spices, as well as toppings, and maybe some things that are components of something like sauce. So there really is quite a few things we can do. And one that you may not think of growing, but would be wheat, is of course a very important component to the standard ordinary pizza. So if we talk first quickly and spend a little time about the herbs, if we just look at, again, some of the more common ones we might see, we have both annuals as well as perennials. And annuals are those plants that we're going to be growing a new plant every single year. Perennials are those that are going to overwinter for us, and they keep coming back year after year. So you can see our annuals are basil and parsley we'll be covering this evening, and our perennials are oregano and chives. And again, there's a lot of other herbs that could be incorporated into these gardenings that could be used for flavoring, but these are the ones we'll focus on. So basil is actually a member of the mint family, which is a good thing. If you have grown mint before, you know that it's a fairly robust plant, and basil isn't all that much removed from that. So it's not a hard one to grow. Uh, it's not real picky when it comes to fertility, which is good. So you don't have to have the best soil out there, and you don't have to pour tons of fertilizer to it. What's interesting with it is while we may be very familiar with the sweet basil types or Genovese basil types, there's also a host of other different types of basils that have different flavors out there, different colors as well. So, you know, it's one of those things where this is a great way to introduce some of the complexity that can exist with plant families, in that there's more than just one basil. And certainly there are some basils better suited for certain culinary tasks than others. One thing that's important about basil is we do want to remove the flowering stalks, because what happens if a plant is able to flower and start setting seed, it stops growing. In its mind, it's accomplished its goal with its reproduction, that seed production, and so they stop producing. So that's why we want to make sure that we are cutting out those flower stalks to get greater production. Basil is one of those plants that we can cut on it several times throughout the season. So it is something that we can give it a haircut, use it as it's growing, and it will continue to produce for us. Parsley is another herb we'll speak on. So parsley is actually a member of the carrot family. And in fact, they're actually a type of parsley that is parsley root that kind of looks like a white carrot. We're not going to speak on that any further, but there, again, there is diversity out there. Growth requirements very similar to what we saw with basil. It's not going to be quite as tolerant of low fertility, so it is one that we will want to fertilize throughout the season. Sometimes when growing from seed, it can take quite a while for the seed to germinate, so just be aware of that and plan ahead. Give yourself some lead time. There's actually two common varieties out there. One is the flat leaf or Italian parsley, and then there's the French or the curled leaf parsley. Generally, it's regarded that the flat leaf has a greater flavor or more robust flavor to it. So if you're specifically looking to get that parsley flavor, probably we'd recommend that you look at growing the flat leaf. This is another one that you can harvest from it more than once. So when you're harvesting, harvest the outside leaf stalks, and that's going to encourage that plant to continue to grow. And so that way you can have multiple harvests over the entire season. Chives is a perennial, and it's related to onions. It's in the Allium or onion family. And there's two main types that we see cultivated. There's chives and then garlic chives. Garlic chives has a mild garlic flavor. The distinguishing characteristic, if we're looking at them, chives, which has the onion flavor, has a round hollow stem. whereas the garlic chives has a flat stem. And so that they are visually very different, and they do have somewhat different flavors. Again, this one also is not picky about fertility, so it's not one we have to baby. All of these do well with full sun and well-drained soils. They don't want to be sitting in wet soil all the time, so make sure if you're putting them into a bed or somewhere that we do have good drainage there. They will self-seed, which can be a challenge sometimes because they can spread in the garden to areas where you don't want them to. But what's good about chives is the flowers are edible. So if you run into a situation where it's flowering and you really want it to stay in its footprint, you're not wanting it to expand, just go in and harvest the flowers and eat those. So it's an easy way to deal with it, and you're able to get a little something out of it as well. Oregano is the last herb we're going to speak on. Again, a member of the mint family. One oddity about oregano, if you are growing from seed, you do have to make sure that the seeds are receiving light. So cover it very lightly with any soil, because we do have to have light getting through to them. Again, well-drained soil, full sun, not picky about fertility. So again, not something that we have to baby too much. And just as in the case of basil, also in the mint family, we keep those flower stalks cut off, and that's going to encourage it to grow vegetatively. And so we can come in, do multiple harvests over the season. And actually, when we go in and harvest these, we'll actually see that they produce additional shoots. They will let vegetative growth happen from buds that were previously dormant, but by actually going in and pruning them or harvesting them, as the case may be, we're actually encouraging that growth. So multiple harvests over the season is not only beneficial for us, it actually helps that plant grow larger. So now garlic. Garlic is one of those that I think, some people may sort of think of it as an herb or a spice, or is it a vegetable? I'll let everybody make the call on that for themselves, because I think you can argue multiple ways on it. What's great about garlic is we're still early in the season. So certainly you could still plant those herbs right now. You're not going to get the full production you would have as if you planted them out in, say, mid-May or something like that. But definitely garlic, we're looking to plant it anywhere from September to November. Pretty easy to grow. You don't have to have a large amount of space, because typically we're looking at spacing garlic on 4 inches, sort of in a pattern, so it's easy to fit into a small area. One thing that I find interesting about garlic in particular is, when it does flower, it has very attractive flowers. There's any number of alliums that we actually grow in the ornamental trade looking for that large round flower that we see with things like garlic. So certainly garlic would not be out of place in a flower bed. It does have that aesthetic appeal to it. We harvest it anywhere from mid-May to early July. The picture there you see is actually some elephant garlic that I got this past weekend whenever I was in for the 4th of July at my father-in-law's, which oddly enough, and I've got it there on the screen, elephant garlic is not literally a garlic. So maybe I'm cheating using that picture. It's actually a leek. It's in the leek family, which is related to onions as well. But basically it has a milder flavor, and it's typically thought to fade more than garlic. So a lot of garlic purists will say, if you want a light garlic flavor, don't use elephant garlic, just use less garlic. But certainly it's not as robust, and so some people actually find they like elephant garlic better than the real thing. So that's just a little interesting tidbit. There's basically 2 classes or 2 kinds of garlic that we can grow, hardneck and softneck. Tennessee is really kind of a transitional area, so you may want to try varieties of both. And you will find there is differences in flavoring and colors and sizes with the different types of garlic. Generally speaking, hardneck garlic is regarded as being more winter hardy, and it actually produces larger cloves. So you may find there are some softneck varieties, particularly if we have a severe winter, do not perform well for us. Because again, we're planting those in late fall, they're overwintering, and then we're harvesting them in very early summer. Tomatoes, one of the most commonly grown vegetables we have in our gardens, very familiar to all of us. One interesting thing, or one particular thing that sets tomatoes apart from basically every other plant we're going to put out in the landscape or in the vegetable garden, is when we're moving those transplants, we can plant them deeper than they were growing as a transplant or as they were growing in a pot. Ordinarily, woody plants, ornamentals, other vegetables, you must always plant things at the same depth. Going deeper is harmful. In the case of tomatoes, because they form adventitious roots along their stems, they actually can benefit by being placed deeper in the soil than they were growing. So that is one unique characteristic of tomatoes that kind of breaks the rule that otherwise we follow pretty religiously in gardening. Spacing, it can vary depending on the type you're growing, but typically you look at 24 inches within rows between plants. And then if we have multiple rows, we're going to be doing 36 inches between those rows. That just makes sure that we have enough room to maneuver up and down those aisleways as the plants get larger. We do want to make a point to plan for staking, caging, trellising. There are a ton of different methods for doing each of those, and most gardeners find something that works well for them. So certainly, if you're not sure how you would do that or how you would like to do that, do a little searching online and you see a lot of examples. We'll probably find something that will work well for you. But it is very beneficial to get those plants up off the ground. It makes it easier to care for the plants, certainly to harvest, and it actually can reduce some disease problems. Tomatoes are somewhat of a heavy feeder, so they do benefit from a water-soluble fertilizer every 2 weeks or so. It's not something where we want to push them too hard, because with most plants, and tomatoes included, if we're throwing too much nitrogen at them, we can actually run into problems where they just stay in vegetative growth and they never produce the fruit that we want. They also benefit from some pruning of suckers. And so suckers are just buds or limbs that start growing out of the notches or branch unions on the main trunk. And what we do is remove those up to the first fruit cluster or up to the first flower, because we're actually removing them before fruit is on the plant. And what we're doing is we're concentrating that growth of the plant into the flower instead of letting it grow more vegetatively. So we're just trying to limit some of that so it puts its energy where we want it. It's not the worst thing in the world if you don't sucker tomato plants. There are some directions on how to sucker tomato plants or pruning the suckers that are mentioned in one of the resources that I'll mention at the end. So if you're not familiar at all what I'm talking about, you may want to review that or feel free to reach out to me. Peppers, another very common vegetable garden crop that we see with home gardeners. You're looking at 15 to 18 inches between plants within rows, and again, 30 to 36 inches between rows. We don't want to be too heavy, particularly on nitrogen fertilizer, until after those first peppers have set. And again, peppers are very prone to, under heavy nitrogen fertilization, grow a wonderfully dark green plant that's 5 feet tall without a single pepper on it. So we do want to have some moderation in this and pay attention to how we're fertilizing it. Always like to encourage folks to cut pepper stems whenever they're harvesting them. Typically in the home garden, it's not a huge scale, so it makes sense to do that. You can damage plants, even break plants if you twist those off the wrong way sometimes. And we like having the stem on a pepper because it does help with the shelf life. So whenever possible, we like seeing that intact. And of course, with peppers, we know there's hot peppers, there's sweet peppers, there's a multitude of colors out there. So certainly there's some ways to introduce some variety into the kitchen, into our culinary efforts, just by looking at the host of peppers that we are able to grow. Also want to talk about onions. So, onions, again, for the most part, they're familiar to us. There are different types, and some are better suited to, for instance, growing for a green onion as opposed to a bulb onion. But again, we have diversity in color. Yellow, white, and reds are out there. We typically start setting onion sets about mid-March in our region, so it is one of the earlier crops we can put out. And when I say sets, that's just mentioning the bulbs, and you have a picture there on your screen of onion sets or onion bulbs. You're within 2-inch spacing whenever you start with the rows. Typically, those get thinned out to 4 inches. What's good is that thinning can actually be done when they grow a little bit, and so you're actually harvesting green onions by doing that. So if you were opposed to using green onions, you could certainly start your spacing at 4 inches rather than 2. But by spacing them at 2 and then thinning, you do get that sort of first crop early on as green onions. If you're doing multiple rows, look at 15 to 18 inches between the rows. So you know onions are ready, or bulb onions are ready to harvest when the top of the plant starts falling over. And so you'll see that 2/3 of the tops within a given crop start to fall over, and that lets you know when they start reaching maturity. So those can be dug. For long storage, if you're looking at storing them, you do want to make sure that they are cured, which just allows them to dry well. Again, in the resources, there's more information on that. Supplemental fertilizer is good for onions. We typically want to see that about 1 week after the bulb begins to form. So it is something that when they're going through that intensive energy process of building that bulb, it is good to have additional resources there for them. So spinach is a crop that maybe some of us became familiar with because of Popeye. Oddly enough, last year I was doing some things with youth and we were talking about spinach, and the kids did not know who Popeye was. I chastised some of the parents that were chaperones and told them they were letting their children down. Didn't get any complaints on that, so maybe I was lucky. But certainly spinach is a healthy crop, and one that is interesting to have on pizzas. I know I like it on mine from time to time. It's again is an early crop that we can sow as early as mid-March in our area and get a harvest by May, so it's pretty rapid. So it's a good one to have in the garden. It's also one that we can have a fall crop off of as well. So it certainly has some diversity to it on when we might be able to produce it in the garden. We typically look at spacing the plants about 5 to 6 inches in any directions. Very often in the garden, we're kind of sowing these as a bed. So rather than sort of distinct lines, it may just kind of be broadcast, and things may get a little closer than that, but certainly that's where you can go in and thin, and suddenly you have baby spinach. So overseeding a little bit is not going to destroy your ability to have a good crop, and it gives you again that chance to harvest an earlier crop out of it. Supplemental fertilizer is appreciated with these plants. You want to wait till they're about a third grown to come in and do that. So again, another crop that does benefit from that fertilizer. And last and certainly not least, winter wheat. So I don't know how many people have ever used winter wheat in their gardens. Historically in the region, winter wheat was very often used as a cover crop on tobacco ground and other farm locations like that. As a cover crop, we can use wheat because what it does is it grows over the winter. And what's great is it scavenges for nutrients that we had applied for the previous crop, and it doesn't allow them to wash away. And so it also prevents erosion. It locks in the soil there. And it actually, believe it or not, soil actually gets more water infiltrated into it when there's plants there than when there's not. So bare ground is something that we honestly never want to see in the garden. There's no real benefit to bare ground. So cover cropping, whether we're using it as a green manure, which is where we just grow a crop rather than harvest it, just to turn it under for the benefit of the soil fertility, or whether we're actually trying to grow wheat ourselves. I think certainly with youth, I don't know that a lot of kids know exactly where bread comes from. Some of the lucky ones may know that it comes from flour, but do they really understand where flour comes from? I think it's a valid question to ask. But we can grow winter wheat in our region. You want to have it broadcast probably no later than October 1. Certain years you can certainly go a little bit later without any difficulty. If we're just kind of growing it for that cover crop, don't worry about additional fertility. If you were going to be serious about wanting to grow your own grain, then we would want to think about doing a soil test and making sure we have everything that we need for it. But certainly something that can be used as a cover crop, and there's a resource that I point you to that talks about the use of different cover crops. So I have put together a bunch of PDFs for you. If you have your smartphone handy or a tablet, that you happen not to be watching this on, you can actually shoot that QR code with your camera and it'll actually take you directly to the link. It's a Google Drive folder. If not, you can see the address there on the screen. And so there's a bunch of PDFs in there that basically cover everything from very basic gardening all the way to cover cropping. If you have any specific questions, I'm more than happy to answer those. That's my cell phone number. So feel free, if you're in the garden and there's an insect or a problem, take a picture. I might be able to help you out with it. If not, I'll pass it on to someone who can. That's a great thing about being with Extension. There's always people smarter than me that I can ask for help. And so with that, I will stop my screen. All right.
Okay, thank you, Adam, for all that information. Of course, there's going to be a little transition period here after I complete my PowerPoint, that if you have any questions, Adam will be able to answer those for you. But I'm quickly going to do a little PowerPoint presentation for you all, and then I'm actually going to go into my kitchen with you all to kind of show you how to, build a pizza and making your own dough and things like that. Of course, I am Elizabeth Renfro, and then on here is my contact information, my email, along with the office phone number that you can contact and get a hold of Adam or myself if for some reason you forgot to get Adam's phone number. But of course, I'm just going to kind of give you all some tips for making your homemade pizza. It's a lot easier than most people put it out to be. I know it's really easy to run and grab a pizza out at a restaurant, or if you have your favorite place that makes pizzas. But one of the big things is making sure that your oven is hot. So, excuse me, anywhere from 500 to 550 degrees Fahrenheit is what you will need. And so if your oven does not go that high, then you want to try to get it to the highest degree that you can. And like Adam was showing, there are options to actually make your own pizza oven outdoors. And so several people can have those also at their homes. You also want to make sure that your cooking surface is hot too. So whether you are using a pizza stone, a baking sheet, or a pizza pan, and then also preheating those. So I actually have made a couple of different types of pizzas. And so while I was heating up the oven, I just went ahead and put the pan in there while that was heating up. So everything just kind of got preheated at the same time. You also want to make sure that your dough is not cold. If you are one that likes to prep things and get things ready and have it, you can actually pre-make your dough and then have it in the refrigerator. You can also put it in the freezer. Just make sure that you wrap it up really well and putting it in a freezer safe bag. But letting it rest and warm to room temperature is important. So anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour is how long you want to do it for, depending on how cold it is. This kind of helps relax the gluten, and it makes it a little bit easier to manipulate the dough. And then also pizza pill your pie. So there's actually something out there that you can buy that does this, or you can use parchment paper. And so I've actually, that's what I used, is parchment paper that's been lightly floured. You can use flour, or you can use cornmeal, whichever one that you like to use. And so, and then just building your pizza on top of that. and then sliding it on an upside down cookie sheet or sheet pan. And I'll show you that when we go into the kitchen. So one thing is that I found interesting is actually, you know, a lot of recipes that I looked at were saying to roll out your dough. But then I found a few places that actually say to stretch out your dough. So if you've seen, you know, a pizza place and things like that, and you've actually watched people make pizzas, you'll see that they're not actually rolling it out. They're stretching it out, or, you know, doing all those neat little tricks with it, that type of thing. So, or you can even press it out or pat it out. And so when you roll it out, it actually deflates it, and it causes that cardboard texture. So nobody really likes the cardboard texture of pizza dough. So this is a good way to prevent that from happening. So in a very thin layer of pizza sauce actually goes a very long way. So it keeps the dough from being soggy, and then also using those fresh ingredients. So like Adam was saying, the peppers, the onions, things like that. One pizza that I have in here is actually using zucchini and yellow squash. So you can use really any type of vegetable that you like. So if you like eggplant, if you like the green peppers or the red peppers, you know, broccoli, spinach, kale, those type of things, you can actually use those on the pizza. But there are certain ingredients that actually benefit from being pre-cooked. So if you like to add hamburger or sausage, those type of things, of course, you want to pre-cook those before you put them on your pizza. Eggplant and broccoli and spinach and kale are actually one of those. It benefits from being pre-cooked. And then also, you can saute these, you can broil them, so whichever that you see fit or a healthier option for you. So mozzarella cheese, you know, a lot of people like fresh mozzarella, and it is great for making some pizzas, but not all pizzas. Fresh mozzarella, if you've ever bought it before, it usually comes in some brine, and so that brine, of course, is wet. And you know, if you have it, if it's too wet, it may cause that sogginess of your dough. So if you do use fresh mozzarella, just make sure that you pat it dry and you drain it well. If you don't have that, you can also use grated, sliced, or diced part skim mozzarella too. And you can also use different other types of cheeses. So mozzarella, you know, that's the most well-known cheese that most people use. But the farmer's market pizza that I'm actually showing you all uses ricotta. The main base is ricotta and mozzarella mixed together. One thing that you can do to get that really crisp crust is to brush olive oil onto the dough before you put it in the oven, and then also when you take it out of the oven. And so this is one of those, what I've done with this one is I've actually brushed it with olive oil, and I've mixed the olive oil with garlic and just a little bit of salt in it. And so this will kind of help bring out some of those flavors that a lot of people will like. And then also, when you start seeing the crust develop in the oven, be sure that you kind of spin it, especially if you don't have a convection oven. So a convection oven is one of those where there is a fan in it that pushes the air and just helps circulate all the air that's in the oven. But if you have a more traditional type oven, you want to kind of watch that and spin it and make sure that one part of it doesn't get overdone compared to the other. And then making sure that you take that cooked pizza into a baking rack rather than an actual flat surface. So that's, you know, going to help it cool a little bit quicker and more evenly compared to if it was just on a flat surface. And then also, Adam talked about using the chives or the green onions, basil, and parsley. Those are considered like tender type herbs for cooking. And so you want to make sure that you add those after you cooked, especially if that's kind of the flavor that you're wanting to pull out. A couple of the recipes that I will share with you all will actually have the basil mixed in with the ricotta cheese and the mozzarella cheese. So traditionally, a lot of people use a tomato-based sauce for their pizzas, but you actually can use really any kind of sauce for your pizzas. So if you like taco pizzas, you can use refried beans, you can use salsa. Some people like the barbecue chicken pizzas, so using a barbecue sauce. Some people like the buffalo chicken pizzas using buffalo sauce. So you can also use pesto, ranch dressing, ketchup, and Alfredo sauce. So if you like the white sauce type pizzas with, a lot of people will use Alfredo sauce with like the spinach and Parmesan cheese and things like that to get the white sauce pizzas. Also, if you want a more crispier crust, you may want to consider pre-baking your homemade crust for 5 to 8 minutes, and then pulling it out and letting it cool for a little bit before you add your sauces and your toppings to that. You can actually do this and then, kind of pre-bake your crust, and then you can turn around and you can freeze it for a later time. Also, don't overtop your pizza. I know we get really excited about wanting to put all kinds of different things on our pizzas, but try not to overtop it. And then also, if you want a really crispy crust and you don't have time to make your own pizza dough, you can also use flour tortillas for that extra crispy crust. And like I was saying earlier, for more flavorful pizza, using those olive oils, the spices, and garlic together, brushing those on the pizza crust before actually putting your toppings on there, and then just using a wide variety of cheeses. So, of course, mozzarella is the most popular, but also you can mix things with Parmesan, goat cheese, feta, brie, cheddar, those type of things. So I saw one recipe where they used, it was brie and blackberries to actually make the pizza. Okay. So real quickly. So real quickly, I am gonna transfer to my kitchen real quick. But this is a good opportunity if you have any questions for Adam to ask those of him as I go and transition real quick.
So everybody should see at the bottom of your screen the little chat bubble option. If you want to click on that and type a question, I'll be happy to answer it. I'll even go so far as to say, even if it's not over something that we've covered specifically tonight. So if it's just related in general to your garden, I'd be more than happy to take a swing at any of those questions. Yes, so we do have a question, and we will make a point to send contact info out to everybody. I think Elizabeth will probably send that in a follow-up email, and certainly the notification you got about the class, I think that does have the office number in it, but I'll go ahead and put my email and my phone number in the chat box so you all can have that. We'll go from there. Blossom end rot on tomatoes. That is a very common problem. And there's actually a lot of research currently happening with blossom end rot on tomatoes. So the shortest answer, and the way I'd recommend you fix it, is become more even with watering. Calcium is delivered into the plant. So blossom end rot is a calcium deficiency that shows up in the fruit. So the easiest way to fix it is to get more calcium in the plant. Yes, there are some sprays you can do that actually get calcium in through the leaves, but you only get a little bit that way. The best way is through water, through proper irrigation. So keeping even moisture in the soil is important, because what happens when you have these huge fluctuations, you have big jumps in the rate of growth. And when that happens, suddenly a deficit of calcium happens and you get basically failure of the cell layers to glue together, and that's why you get that collapse on the blossom end rot, that rapidly expanding part of the fruit. So even watering using mulches, such as, you know, everything from grass clippings, leaves, things like that, those organic type mulches to help hold moisture in, is great. And that's kind of the best practice. There are some varieties that may be a little more sensitive to it than others. We actually see it more common when we stake plants up, because tomatoes do root down across the stem, and so when they are trailing on the ground, they actually capture a little more water and thus calcium that way. But again, we probably get more benefits out of trellising them or staking them, so it's probably still a good idea to do it. I actually have a class coming up on fall gardening. It's going to be the 23rd, if I'm remembering the date correctly, a Thursday night at the end of the month. So if you're interested in that, pay attention to our Facebook feed. We'll be putting that up as a event very soon. By and large, no. Gardening in the fall is not dramatically different from gardening in our typical spring-summer period, but there's a few things to know about and a few things to take into consideration. So certainly, if you're interested in doing a fall gardening this year, I would encourage you to attend that. And I think Elizabeth is ready, and I don't see another question popping in.
Okay. Thanks, Adam. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I can see you and hear you.
Okay. So we've kind of transitioned into my kitchen, and I'm going to show you all some quick things. It's so much better in person, but of course, this is the best that we can do right now. And so one thing, of course, is washing your hands, and also if you wear any jewelry, especially if you're making your own dough, taking off any jewelry that you might have on your hands or wrists. Just because you don't want to get all that dough in there and having a fun time trying to clean that out. So of course, the big thing is starting off with the base of your pizza. And so of course that's the pizza dough. And I will share this recipe. I will email it out to those that are on this Zoom session. So if you want, just go ahead and type your name into the chat function so that I know who is here. I've been kind of keeping track, but just in case you popped on since I started, I just want to catch and make sure that you got it. And then I'll also share them with Adam. So he will put it onto that website, the Pizza Garden website, so you all have access to that. So you can purchase your own pizza dough, or you can make your own. And so one of the things to get is actually pizza crust. See if y'all can see that. Pizza crust yeast, okay? And so I actually just kind of followed the recipe on the back of there. And so this one, you can make it within less than 10 minutes. You can actually make your pizza crust. And so mixing it together, okay, and what you need for here is flour, so all-purpose flour. You need 1 packet of the pizza crust yeast. You need 1.5 teaspoons of sugar. You also need 3/4 teaspoon of salt, okay? And then also some very warm water. So basically kind of think of it as bath water. That's about how warm that you want it. Also, one thing to consider is using bottled water for this rather than the tap water. And just because, you know, there's been some back and forth about the chlorine and things like that that can be in tap water, and possibly even preventing the yeast from growing. So I actually use bottled water when I make any kind of bread products. And then also using 3 tablespoons of oil. So this evening or today, I pre-made this. I used olive oil, and you can also use vegetable oil, canola oil, those type of things. You can use the flavored olive oil. So that way, if you want just kind of a different taste for the pizza dough. So you can see I made this earlier today, and I put it in a bowl, okay? So this here, you want to let it rise, and then, you know, if you let it rise, and then once it rises, then you can wrap it up in plastic wrap, and then you can put it in a freezer bag and then put it in your freezer and save it for later. But you want to make sure that the dough that you're using, as you can tell, it's very stretchy, doesn't really stick, okay? So this, one of these makes a thick crust pizza. So if you like thick crust pizza, then you will just use just one recipe for this, or if you like the thin crust, you can cut it in half, or if you're wanting to make more of your own personal size pizza, you can also cut it in half, or cut the dough in half. Okay, so one thing that we want to do, let's set this aside here, is we have parchment paper here. So this is what you can use in place of a pizza pill. And also, if you have a pizza stone, you can use a pizza stone. I don't have a pizza stone, actually mine broke. So you can use a pizza pan, or you can use a baking sheet or a cookie sheet. And so I'm going to use a cookie sheet, and you turn it upside down, and that's how you're going to place your parchment paper on there. So of course, before you get all of this started, you want to preheat your oven to that 500 to 550 degrees. So I'm going to go ahead and I am going to take some of my flour here, and that's just to keep it from sticking and sliding off a little bit easier. You can also use cornmeal if you like cornmeal. Now, pizza is one of those you practice. So it's been a little bit of time since I've actually made homemade pizza. So you just kind of work it and you stretch it as you go around. Okay. And just kind of make it a little bit, stretch it as you turn it. Okay. And you can make it in different sizes. You can pat it out. Okay. You keep patting it. I'm going to turn it over just to make it easier. So I have flour on both sides. Okay. So one of the things, and I'll show you the farmer's market way of this pizza. So what it is, I've pre-made it over here. What it is it is 1.5 cups of ricotta cheese, half a cup of shredded mozzarella cheese. It's got a half a teaspoon of salt, and then it also has basil in here too. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to take it and we're just going to spread it out. And you can see my pizza dough crust is not pretty like you would see in a restaurant, and that's totally okay, because this is what makes it so unique into your own. And this is what makes it fun for kids, so that they're able to make their own pizza. Oh, and then also what's in here in this mixture is red pepper flakes. And so over here what I have is I have some mushrooms. And so we're gonna put those mushrooms on top, just kind of spread them out. And so with your vegetables, you wanna make sure that they are thinly sliced, okay? So that they actually cook a little bit even, or cook even better. And then I have some yellow squash over here. So we can throw some yellow squash on here. And then zucchini. All the time. When you grow zucchini, it seems like you get a whole bunch. You plant one plant and it feels like you get a ton of zucchini. You don't know what to do with it, so you can actually make pizza. You can use it on pizza. Okay. So we got our zucchini on there. I've got some red pepper here. So I'm gonna put some red pepper on here. So remember that we don't want to overdo this. So if you're an artist, if you're very creative, you can make designs and things like that out of your pizza dough. You can make it out of the vegetables that you use. You can also use fruits. So like I was saying earlier, you can use blackberries. You can make a blackberry one. Okay, and then we are going to go ahead and brush this. You can brush it, you can brush the crust before. You can also brush it afterwards. And I'm just brushing the top of the vegetables right now. And then I'm going to brush the outside, the crust of that. Okay, and this, what I'm brushing it with is olive oil, some garlic, and a little bit of salt in there. Okay, and then we're going to go ahead and we are going to take our pizza that we have made here, and we are going to stick it in our oven that's been preheating for 550. So the magic of this is I've already got one done. So this is what the farmer's market pizza looks like. And so, you know, it's really good. And then the other one that I have is more of the traditional type of pizza. So the one that has the red sauce, and I'll show you a quick way to make that red sauce. And then it's got a little bit of mushrooms and red bell peppers on there. You can also add onions if you like onions. Okay. So the red sauce here, let me grab my recipe and make sure I tell you all correctly. But you can use, this is a 5-minute no-cook fresh tomato pizza sauce. So with pizza sauce, what I've found is that it's best to use fresh ingredients and not overcook your pizza sauce. And so this is one is really easy to make. So what you need is about 1 pound of fresh tomatoes. So I used Roma tomatoes. Roma tomatoes are one of those that we recommend for people that are going to be canning a lot to use Roma because they have more meat to them. They don't have as many seeds as other tomatoes. And so what I did is I went ahead and I quartered those. So I've got some here that you all can kind of see. I've quartered those. I've taken out the seeds from those. I put them into a high processing blender. You can also use a food processor. You can also use an immersion blender, that type of thing. You also need tomato paste for this. So it's a 6 ounce can of tomato paste. You need 2 tablespoons of olive oil. You need 2 teaspoons of that dry oregano. If you are using fresh oregano, you're going to have to use more of that to get the flavor out of it. You can use 1 teaspoon of granulated sugar. And then also 2 medium cloves of garlic. You want to mince those up, but I kind of cheated today because I don't have any fresh garlic. So I use this. This can be a friend too for cooks. But I also use that to put into this recipe. And then also using half a teaspoon of salt, and then a couple turns of fresh ground pepper, and then chopping that fresh basil, and then just a pinch of fresh or red pepper flakes. And so you blend it together, okay? And the good thing about this is, so pizza sauce, you don't want it to be too liquidy, okay? So this pizza sauce, I'll pull it out. I blended it, and I maybe blended it for about a minute because I do have a high processor blender. And so this is kind of what you're looking for, that consistency. It smells really good too. And you can also make this, if you're not a fan of things that are hot, like heat hot, you can omit that red pepper from the recipe. But it's a good way, and so I'll show you all. I think you all kind of saw it. This is what the pizza looked like afterwards. The red pepper sauce. Okay, and that's probably the one more kids are gonna like. That's the one that they're probably most used to, is that red pepper sauce. So, is there any questions? I know kind of went through that a little bit quickly. Is there any questions?
I am not seeing any pop in yet, but I'll watch the chat box for us.
Okay. I will, while we're waiting, I will go back into the other room.
We do have one request for your address so we can all come and eat pizza.
Oh. Yes. Hold on. All right. I'm back.
Okay, we do have one question in. They asked for you to say again why you baked on the back of a cookie sheet.
It helps raise it up off of the, it helps raise it up off of the heating source. It's just you can use it on the other side if you want to. But that's what I've read from multiple sources, is just to turn it upside down and put the parchment paper on top of that.
For the moment, that appears to be all the questions.
Okay. Yeah, so I will share with you all the recipes that I used. And so I will actually email those to you, and then I will actually share them with Adam so that he can post them on that website that he had, the tiny.utk.edu/pizza garden. So you all can have those recipes to make your own pizza sauce or the farmer's market pizza, and then also the pizza dough.
Elizabeth, do those recipes have a breakdown on calories?
No. They don't. But I'm sure you can, the recipe for the pizza dough, I'm sure you can get on the manufacturer's website, and they can tell you maybe a general idea of what the calories are for that pizza dough.
It looks like Sean has his hand raised. I don't know if that's on purpose or by mistake. I may, let's see here. Let's see if I need to unmute him. Maybe that's what he's asking for. Sean, I think you should be able to unmute yourself if you'd like.
We are unmuted.
Did you have a question?
Yes.
Okay, go right ahead.
Oh, how can we get the recipe for the pizza?
So I will email those out to you all, because when you signed up, it automatically saved your email address. So I will email it out that way, and then I'll type in the website where Adam has his sources, and then also I will ask him to post those recipes on that website so that you have access to that.
All right, thank you.
Uh-huh.
I think you've created some enthusiasm.
Yeah, it's really easy to do. The pizza, I had it in the oven for maybe no more than 15 minutes. So it was really easy. It was really simple. You could probably have your own pizza done in less than 30 minutes. And it made, sometimes you got to wait at least an hour for some pizza at restaurants. And so this is a good way to get it easily.
Well, and that's it. And we are getting into, I've seen some of our like farmers market growers talk about, they have things the next week or two that's going to be coming ripe, like tomatoes and everything. So to me, it's like we just hit just in front of the peak. So I think definitely people's going to have some good opportunities to put this into practice, whether from their own garden or from of our producers regionally.
Yes. But thank you all for joining us this evening. Of course, if you have any questions for Adam or myself, we did share our contact information. We will be posting this meeting onto YouTube, so you can refer back to it. You can also visit our website at washington.tennessee.edu, and you can find our contact information on that website if you need to get a hold of us. So I both thank you for joining us today. If you have any ideas for other classes for us to do together, or just classes in general, let us know. I think next year we do plan on doing some classes together, like a breakfast garden. I think some of you joined us for our herb type garden class, pizza garden, just different types of gardens. So, and how to cook with those items. But we all hope that you have a good evening. Did you have anything else, Adam?
Nope, just thank you and feel free to reach out if I can be a help.
Thank you all. Have a good evening.